The hardest exam at the Magic Academy is about to begin. Whoever manages to destroy this magic cube will pass. Many candidates already failed using every kind of power they had trying to break the cube. After so many failures, the professor paused the exam, because the next student set to take the test is someone he hates for having a very weak power. During the break, he takes the chance to reinforce the cube with a secret spell that makes it even stronger. His goal was to make sure the boy would fail in front of everyone. The problem is he got the order wrong, and a blonde boy went before the one he was expecting. The blonde boy walked up to the cube and tried to destroy it, but his unstable mana triggers the spell in a catastrophic way, and the cube turns into a powerful tornado that left even the professor in shock. The low-power boy the professor hates reads the situation in seconds, jumps out of his seat and lands in the middle of the arena. The professor with his magic shield was already struggling to hold on. Suddenly the tornado starts to open up, and the boy walks through it calmly, leaving the professor completely speechless. He reaches the cube, now out of control, places his hand on it, and starts neutralizing the mana using his unique ability of creation. The magic begins to fade, leaving the cube stable once again. He then picks up the cube, hands it to the professor completely unbothered, and asks if he passed the test. The professor frozen, trying to process what he just witnessed. But to get here he had to go through a loss that changed everything. To understand that, we need to go back a few years. This is Aruto, the boy who was born with zero magical power, and because of that he couldn't protect the woman he loved from a powerful mage called Gamazin. Hana was attacked right in front of him and he froze, watching the woman he loved being killed. He spent 15 years studying and running dungeons, trying to find an item that could bring her back. 55 years later, he's old and worn down, and he still hasn't found the item that would bring her back. At the end of his life, wounded and exhausted, he collapsed to the ground and said his silent goodbye to her. Then something unexpected happened. A mysterious sphere congratulated him. He had obtained the item Divine Tear, an extremely rare reward that grants the right to restart life from scratch, but of course with one condition. He gets 20 years and only one shot. If he couldn't change fate in that time, he would be erased from existence. Without hesitation, Aruto said yes. So the floating sperm enters Aruto, and his second life begins. The MC was reborn as a baby in the arms of his parents, who he had lost as a child. Since he's still a baby and can't talk, he spent the first months just taking everything in. During that time he trained the limits of a baby's body. He could barely sit up on his own, and was already focused on leveling up. In this world everyone is born with a gift. His old gift was wisdom, but this time his new gift is creation. This new gift brought up a status screen that only he could see, with abilities that didn't exist in that world. With no time to waste, he decides to get up and starts training to save Hana in the future. Still just a baby, he was already studying and training his magic to boost his status. We reach his 8th birthday. He trained hard for this day, and now his status is really high. This day matters because in his past life, a horde of goblins had attacked the village and killed his father and his mother. But this time, Aruto was ready, hidden in the forest waiting for that same attack. Aruto thought he was well hidden, but the goblin spotted him and charged right at him. The boy channels his mana, and while the goblin was mid-air, he fires off his fireball and lands a direct hit. Watching its friend go down, another goblin tried to get revenge but gets hit by the magic too. Aruto dodges the last goblin's attack and fires his fireball, turning them into goblin barbecue. His level went up from those kills. Suddenly a bush moves and a goblin jumps out at him. This time he couldn't dodge in time and got his arm slashed. Right after he drives his knife into the monster and splits it in half. But from that one came way more and that scared him because he didn't expect that. For a moment he was afraid of dying and not being able to change his woman's fate. But he refuses to accept that and promised himself that he would never give up again.
Man, I'm dead.
Looking at the panel, Aruto realizes he has a new skill and wonders if he gained it after his magic power passed a certain point. Then, he looks back at the goblin horde and concludes he will only test the attribute if it is non-combat. An enemy charges again with hatred in its eyes. Running, our boy creates distance to use his fireball again. The problem is that his arm is in bad shape, and realizing he is about to be brutally attacked, he says that now it is all or nothing, and decides to put all his magic power into a single attack. A sphere of blue light appears, and is then hurled toward the creatures, who, out of nowhere, begin to plunge into a crater that opened in the ground, until they simply disappear, leaving the boy alone. Dumbfounded, Aruto finally realizes what his new skill is, and very happy, says he will be able to change his destiny. With his arm raised, he celebrates the fact that he protected the village, while several level-up messages appear, thanks to the number of goblins he defeated. However, since not everything is perfect, the pain from leveling up so many times in a row quickly sets in, making the little one scream. Collapsing to the ground, the protagonist says that this is the pain of growing up. A few hours later, when it's already daytime, he opens his eyes and feels something on his face. As he turns over, our boy sees what looks like a blue slime and gets startled. The little creature comes closer and offers water. the protagonist accepts, and after washing his face he feels much better. The little one jumps for joy, while he wonders what the hell that thing is. We learn that slimes aren't dangerous monsters. However, they also aren't usually kind to humans. The little blob jumps onto the boy's face and starts tickling him. After some time, he looks at the village where he was born and says it's time to go back, since there's someone he has to save. Still very weak, our boy reveals that his plan is to go train in a world-famous dungeon in the city of Kinoto, Greece, and to conquer the final floor to raise his level as much as possible. Before leaving, he goes back home and leaves a letter for his parents, thanking them for having raised him with so much love. With tears in his eyes as he remembers how amazing his 8 years were, Aruto says it's time, and after seeing the slime's insistence he names it Ru and says it can come along. A month later, we see the protagonist fighting wolves. The little creature shows up with the monster's crystal and puts it in the bag along with the others. Suddenly, it shows that it found a good place to camp. Our boy likes what he sees and decides to rest a bit before continuing the trip. As night falls, he lights a campfire and grills wolf skewers. While he eats, the protagonist says that now he can easily defeat low-rank monsters and that his body is already getting used to fighting, to the point that it's finally matching his experience, which means leveling up in the dungeon will be easier. Ru also takes the chance to grab a bite and show that it feels stronger too. Our boy understands that they should take advantage and eat a lot after so much hard work, and he thanks the little one for being a great helper. We see that someone is watching the pair. Sensing a presence, the young man throws a skewer and asks who the intruder is. The person starts running and leaping at high speed, to the point that Aruto's eyes can't keep up. Worried, he says that if he gets attacked, things will get ugly. Seeing that it's a girl, the boy wonders if she's a bandit, eyeing his magic stones. But we see that she's more interested in the meat skewers. When he realizes she's a beast girl, Aruto is surprised. The young woman introduces herself as Magica and says she's on a journey, then asks what the boy is doing there. The protagonist only says his name and studies the girl, who seems to be of the squirrel race. Running, the little one approaches the campfire and asks if she can eat the rest of the meat. Our boy asks what she's doing there, but she doesn't listen to him. When day breaks, she follows him and says she also has something to do in Kinoto Gray. After being called a child, the young man asks if the girl isn't one too, but Magica denies it and says she's an adult. He then says he doesn't intend to go on a journey. However, remembering something, he backtracks and says they should go together. Next, the pair spots their final destination, and after having their papers checked, they're allowed to enter Kinoto Grace. We learn that the city is home to people of various races, all thanks to the dungeon's appeal. Seeing the girl nervous, the protagonist asks what happened. She says she's anxious because of how many people there are. Having also lived in a village, Aruto says he got nervous too when he went there for the first time. And realizing he talked too much, he lies, claiming he visited the city with his parents when he was very little. Our boy remembers his first life, and in his thoughts, says the city seems livelier and cleaner than when he was 10, which means something will happen in the next 2 years. Magica asks what the plan is, and he says he needs to go to the Adventurers Guild to get money. Quickly, the pair arrives at the place, and excited, the protagonist tells the receptionist that he wants to exchange magic stones. Noticing the young man as a child, the red-haired guy tells him to go home, but upon seeing an absurd amount of stones, he's left open-mouthed. Our boy says it all belongs to the girl, and he's just helping with the sale. The young woman tries to tell the truth, but he covers her mouth, while asking the young man to make the exchange. Smiling, the clerk quickly takes 2 gold coins, 29 silver, and 85 bronze. Aruto sighs as he realizes he was cheated, since he thought he would receive more. Next, he asks if he can register as an adventurer, stating that the registration is not for him, but for Magica. Outside, the girl approaches and asks if he asked for her company, just for that. Denying it, the protagonist says he only needed a bit of help, and spending time selling magic stones is not a bad thing. When asked about his reputation, he says he does not care about that kind of thing. Now that he has money, he will look for an inn, but first he would like to pay for a meal as thanks. Magica agrees and says she will sleep in his room for a while, since she has no money. At the inn, the young man says he is happy to have company, and that the food in that place is wonderful. When he is stared at, he asks what is wrong. Taking off her clothes, the girl says it is nothing, but that they need to take a bath first. The scene makes Aruto scream. In the shower, the young woman thinks about how everything seems new to her. She decides to just go to sleep and leave the regrets for the next day. When she enters the room, she finds the boy meditating. As manospheres light up the entire room, she says that should be impossible for humans. The girl wonders what the hell the young man is. We learn that Magica had been traveling the world looking for someone, until the boy caught her attention, since he had great strength and abilities she had never seen before. That is why she got in touch to learn more. However, all she has done is be surprised by the boy's maturity. In her daydream, the young woman wonders if the protagonist is the one who will bring changes to that world, then concluding that no, since the oracle said the hero would be a girl. Even so, she says she cannot stop feeling that the kid is a key. A few hours later, Magica watches Aruto sleeping soundly. But suddenly, a noise catches her attention. Without moving, she wonders if whoever is there is an assassin, given their high level. The young woman decides to do nothing, curious to see how the boy will handle that situation. The stranger approaches the protagonist's bag, but he gets up and says good evening. Quickly, the hooded man grabs his dagger and lunges at him. The squirrel girl finally gets up to intervene, as the thief tells her not to move unless she wants to be left without her friend. With his eyes shining, our boy asks how the stranger knew the money was in his bag, then launching an attack using his air bazooka skill, which sends the hooded man flying out the window. Magica asks if the young man is okay. He says yes, thinking the girl concludes that he could have killed the intruder with that magic, and she wonders how much training was needed to reach that level at such a young age. She decides to ask something, but realizes the protagonist has already passed out, and she says to herself that that child will definitely become something. The next day, at breakfast time, Aruto asks if the squirrel girl liked the food. Confirming it, the young woman says that is the best food she has ever eaten in her entire life. After 10 potions, the pair leaves the inn. Our boy says that because of the visit the night before, he will have to stop by a place first. They both return to the Adventurers Guild and find the red-haired guy and a young man with glasses. The receptionist asks if something happened to the magic stones, and without waiting for an answer, says he is too busy talking with his boss to discuss that matter. Getting straight to the point, the protagonist says there are thieves in the guild, since someone broke into his room yesterday with the aim of taking the money he earned from selling the stones. And, to make matters worse, the person knew exactly where to look. The boss asks if Rion saw anything suspicious. Nervous, the young man says he might know of someone, but when pressed, he apologizes and says it is only a guess. Aruto says that Magica left a mark on the culprit's left arm. The receptionist pulls down his shirt sleeve, while our boy shows the dagger he is going to hand over to the guards. Shouting, the red-haired guy says it would be better to let the young man keep the weapon, since he took care of the bandit. Outside, the squirrel girl asks why the young man let it go. Smiling, he says he just wanted to give a warning, making the girl realize that the dagger had been the goal all along. Looking at the tower, the protagonist says it is time to begin the adventure. Inside the labyrinth of Kinotagris, passing through the portal, he says that no one knows how far the tower goes, much less who built it. We learn that the first and second floors are known as the lower layer, and it is where anyone can hunt safely. It is used mainly by beginner adventurers. Suddenly, someone shouts that a monster from the upper level has come down, and everyone starts telling Aruto, who is a child, to get out of there. Face to face with the enemy, our boy uses his grave skill to open a crater in the ground. The adventurers wonder if an earthquake happened. Running alongside Magica, the protagonist tells everyone to be careful of the crater, revealing that he only does not tell the truth because he knows no one would believe him. The pair reaches the 26th floor, which is in the middle layer, and is where the labyrinth begins. Watching the girl fight, he is impressed by how she finished off the enemy with just one punch, then deciding to see what the dagger is capable of. Happy, our boy says the weapon is better than he expected, while he watches the item's effect on the skill board. Then he goes on the attack. With the job done, the protagonist says it is better to hunt stronger monsters in the upper layer. After they arrive at their destination, in a cave full of shining crystals, we see Aruto fighting a skeleton, then casting a spell at the others who are about to attack him. The crystals fly toward the creatures and an explosion happens, sending bones flying everywhere. We learn that the upper layer begins on the 50th floor and is a zone that only a few high-level adventurers can enter. Knowing that, the protagonist states that they must level up before facing the stronger enemies. Magica asks how he is able to kill monsters so easily, since adventurers have difficulty doing that, but he, who is just a child, does not. The protagonist asks if she really thinks his strength is strange, while thinking that the young woman is the second person who truly sees him, since in his past life, aside from Hannah, everyone turned their backs on him because of his weak power of existence. The girl asks if the young man is really human, and without getting the truth, says she will call him a pervert. After a few more dead skeletons, the pair prepares to climb higher, and they come face to face with the Red Ogre, exactly as Aruto knew it would be. In his thoughts, he wonders whether he would be able to defeat the creature more easily than last time. Worried, Magica says the monster is on a completely different level, so the boy should stay behind her. Taking the lead, the protagonist says that actually he will fight alone. After all, even with the risks, that is the chance to test his abilities. Without hesitating, he charges at the ogre, and after landing his first blow concludes that it is as if his opponent has steel under its skin. The monster counterattacks, causing a small wound on the young man's cheek. As he lands other blows, he says that if he dodges and keeps attacking the same spot every time, he can win. No sooner said than done. After some time, the ogre loses its head, while Aruto is left panting. Dumbfounded, Magica wonders how that is possible. Our boy says that apparently that is as far as he can go with his current level. Rue approaches carrying the magic stone, which is much larger than the ones from other monsters. Exhausted, the protagonist asks what the squirrel girl thinks about them going back. However, she asks, without turning around, what that sound is. With his eyes wide, the young man says they need to run. Disagreeing, the girl says that if they turn their backs they will die to the horned ogre. It is revealed that the plant ogre is in fact an ogre possessed by a Hera monster, which becomes very strong when it finds a host. Perplexed, the protagonist wonders what a level 70 monster is doing on the 50th floor, and concludes that he does not stand the slightest chance of winning. Upon hearing the escape plan, Magica says she is not going anywhere, since, even knowing the monster is strong, she is at her limit. We learn that the girl went through harsh training to fulfill her mission of finding the hero, and all that time thought she worked harder than anyone else. But after meeting Aruto, she realized her effort is still not enough. Charging to attack with her skill activated, she says she will not lose. After all, the burden she carries on her back is heavier than the ogre. The enemy remains unfazed after taking a punch, and preparing its counterattack shows that it does not have a single scratch. The squirrel girl manages to run, and using her speed to her advantage, he lands several blows in succession, hoping to win. She appears behind the ogre, but ends up being stopped by vines that wrap around her body. Completely immobilized, Magica starts screaming, until, suddenly something cuts the bindings. It is Aruto who, with quick strikes, frees his ally from danger. Turning around, he asks if she is okay. Confirming it, the young woman can only think how pathetic it is to be saved by a child. Activating her power again, she says she is done playing around, and determined to put an end to the ghosts that haunt her mind, charges forward. To unleash the Great Star Strike, fireballs fly toward the ogre. He ends up being hurled far away. The squirrel girl runs out of mana after using her secret move, and looking ahead, realizes she is about to be crushed. Suddenly, the ground begins to crack, and with its leg trapped in a fissure, the monster ends up falling. Magica remains in shock, while Aruto scoops her up and runs. After taking the young woman to safety, he asks Rue to look after her, and returns to the battle against the ogre. Furious, the ogre launches its vines again. Our boy charges forward, dodging all the tendrils, but because he is not as fast as the squirrel girl, he ends up getting hit head-on. Unable to breathe, the protagonist activates his heat magic and makes the vines start to burn. Since they are made of vines, and knowing it is useless to keep burning them because the tendrils regenerate, the young man concludes it is time to strike the creature's body. Thus he goes on the attack, cutting through the vines along the way, while thinking it is impossible to pierce the ogre's skin, which means he needs to find a weak point. Aruto quickly notices something on the monster's head, and without hesitating, throws a fireball. It hits the target dead on, making the creature scream. Our boy watches the flames and, completely exhausted, passes out. In disbelief, Magica sees the ogre turn to ashes, and concludes she lost to a child. After some time, the protagonist opens his eyes and realizes he is outside the tower. Hugging Rue, he thanks him for carrying them there, and turning around says he is glad they managed to get out. Apologizing, the squirrel girl says she will return to the inn. The protagonist says he will rest a little longer, while thinking about the fact that the young woman is an artifact bearer, which are celestial treasures and very rare. Knowing that the artifact the girl uses is Stella, he remembers that in his first life the item's user died 7 years later. At night, at the inn, Aruto cannot stop thinking about Magica's situation, since the only person who shares those characteristics is number 5 among the church's dangerous beings, who is part of the list of the 6 individuals declared enemies of God, the same ones the church ordered exterminated. Remembering the fight, the boy says that the young woman will certainly become much stronger than him in the future, because of the existential power gap between them. But 7 years later, the squirrel girl will die at the hands of the church. Immersed in the water, the protagonist wonders whether he will really be able to change the future. However, Rufsi appears, startling him. The slime shows that it would also like to get cleaned up, so our boy decides to give it a premium wash, as thanks for what the little one did. After a few minutes, we see the little creature shining from being so clean. Our boy asks if his friend is okay, but it melts, showing that a bath is not the best idea. Everything turns out fine, and as he leaves the bathroom, the young man runs into Magica, who, a little apprehensive, says she has something she would like to talk about. The pair go outside. Not knowing what is wrong, Erupto starts talking about how beautiful the view is. After working up the courage, the girl says she was sure she would never be defeated by a monster. But that day made her remember how weak she still is. So from that moment on, she will train alone, since she will become spoiled if she keeps staying with him, saying she would not have noticed that if she had not met him. The squirrel girl thanks him and promises she will win next time. Holding a cup of coffee, our boy laughs, while thinking about how everything comes down to effort. Making a toast, they promise to become stronger before they meet again. However, what they do not know is that no matter how hard they try, there is still a force that can easily crush them. The next day, the protagonist wakes up and seeing Magica's bed empty, feels sad, but determined to move forward, he gets up and leaves. After that, he lost track of time and kept dedicating himself to training, starting by raising the level of his crafting skill. In the forest, our boy concludes that this is the perfect place to find ores, and using his power, splits a large rock in half, revealing emeralds. After some time, he learns the blacksmith attribute and concludes that the crafting skill can also produce things. Thus, after gathering materials in the dungeon and refining them using heat magic, the young man finally created his first weapon by himself. We discover that, as he continued improving his sword, he also learned some new skills, like double stack, unlocked during a battle against a worm, which was left in pieces after being struck. In addition, during a fight against enraged buffalo, he discovered that thanks to the increase in his grave skill, it was also possible to combine it with other spells, which made the pit more lethal. Suddenly, a message appears, warning that the hack skill has been learned. Analyzing it, the boy discovers that it will now be possible to move the target wherever he wants, depending on how much mana he puts in. Without hesitating, he moves a stone and seeing that it is a useful attribute, decides to raise its level as well. As time passed, the winter season arrived, and rumors about someone who hunted 1,000 monsters on the tower's upper floor began to spread. Turning around, two young men realize they might be face to face with the one responsible. Thoughtful, Aruto wonders whether his existence is finally being recognized, as he remembers how he was ignored in the past. Back at the inn, he says he will be in the dungeon starting the next day, therefore his room will be empty for a day or two. The receptionist tells him to be careful, and asks whether the squirrel girl is okay. The protagonist tells what happened, and the woman says she is worried, because she hasn't seen the young girl for several days. That leaves our boy's heart uneasy. Suddenly, a young man comments about the knights who serve the Pope. The protagonist runs out, since he concludes that if his future is different, Magica's is different too. Thus the Pope may have already sent the order, and what would only happen 7 years from now, could happen now. Inside the carriage, a mysterious man is surprised by the energy of the boy who just passed by. Upon arriving at the tower, Arato uses his detection skill to find the girl. Quickly, he finds her and shouts her name. Surprised, the young girl asks how the boy is doing. Relieved to have found the squirrel girl alive, he says he is fine, and when asked why he is out of breath, lies, claiming he was just exercising when he saw her. Next, the protagonist hands his scarf to Magica because of the cold. But suddenly, something appears in the sky. It is a black sphere that begins to grow slowly. Realizing what is about to happen, Arato Y asks the young girl to evacuate the people of the city. Out of nowhere, the sphere splits apart, releasing a terrifying devil with yellow eyes. Confused, the young man wonders why the monster that reigns on the highest level of all is in the city. The creature points a finger and causes the first explosion. We discover that its goal is to wreak havoc until everything turns to dust. Fallen on the ground, Aruto realizes that he can't move, exactly as happened in the past, because of the existential power gap. Even so, he tries with all his might to stand up, since the city will be destroyed if nothing is done. Magica returns the scarf and, saying that everything is fine, heads into battle without hesitation. After coming face to face with the demon, she charges and delivers her first strike. Watching everything from afar, the protagonist says his ally really has become much stronger. However, the enemy re-emerges amid the dust, showing that it has a regeneration ability. Determined, the squirrel girl says she will only need to use a stronger blow. But to her misfortune, the devil disappears and appears again behind her, forcing the girl to give up on using the artifact. After taking an attack, she ends up on the ground. Still down, Aruto wonders if his 8 years were just a waste of time. However, to his surprise, his mana begins to react, showing that he can use magic without moving. The devil attacks Magica again, who, while dodging, states that if she is hit, she will certainly die. Thus she needs to find a way to use the artifact, since dealing repeated damage is not effective. Suddenly, the enemy launches an attack that throws the young girl far away. On the ground, she wonders how it is possible to release such a strong aura while gathering mana. Her thoughts stop when she realizes what is about to come. The creature unleashes a fire tornado, and when the squirrel girl was ready to leave, something changes the direction of the flames. The devil is left gaping, showing that he didn't expect that either, until, out of nowhere, he loses his balance. Smiling, Aruto shows that he's been learning new things too. The monster starts falling toward Magica, who, when called out at the top of someone's lungs, realizes it's time to use her artifact. With her strike called Magnum, she hits the enemy dead on, making holes appear in its body, until only ashes remain. With the teamwork finished, the squirrel girl runs over to the protagonist to ask if he's okay. The young man says yes, and that he'll get better soon. Putting our boy on her back, the young woman says she'll carry him to the inn. On the way, he talks about his new skill, hack, and giving a demonstration, puts the scarf back around his friend's neck, while explaining that, with it he can deflect the enemy's attacks, block their advance or force them to move. However, even so, According to him, it was impossible to defeat the devil alone, which means the one who saved the city was Magica. The girl says the young man deserves credit too. Thinking, the protagonist wonders who defeated the creature in his past life, since he doesn't remember. Suddenly, he notices something and tells the young woman to stop. She obeys, and next, they stay very quiet, watching a hooded man and two guards. Completely shocked, Aruto realizes he knows that evil mana very well, since it belongs to Gamazin, the mage who killed Henna in the past. Upon hearing that he is one of Euphonia's 12 generals, the squirrel girl realizes she knows the man too. Full of hatred, our boy prepares to launch an attack, saying he needs to wipe out that mage for good. The girl, nervous, reminds him of the level-up sickness and shouting, says it's impossible for him to win in those conditions. Calming down, the young man agrees and gives up. Down below, the mage says he was eager to test the summoning item he received, but the object was useless, since it brought only a low-rank demon, which was easily defeated. The guard says what he did isn't allowed in that country, and ends up suspended in midair by a spell. Irritated, Gamazin says it's normal to test a new item, which means the man should keep his mouth shut. After slamming the guard hard into the ground, he says he wants to return to the capital to continue his research, since the person he was looking for doesn't exist in that city. Looking out the window, the mage watches the pair and is surprised to see the squirrel girl. Activating his power, he wonders whether he should capture her, since she would make an excellent test subject. But remembering he would lose the king's support if he acted behind the scenes, he decides to wait a little longer. Frightened, Magica says she thought she was going to be killed right then and there, while Aruto beats himself up for thinking he'd be able to fight the enemy there. Even so, he promises he'll make Gamazin pay for everything he's done, the next time they meet. Several days later, the Lord of Kinagris offered a reward to the squirrel girl for subjugating the devil, but the negotiation went nowhere, since the Lord refused to acknowledge the protagonist because of his low level of existential power. Irritated, the girl asks why people refuse to acknowledge the young man's strength. Meanwhile, our boy thinks about how she and Hannah are the only ones who don't follow that world's rule. Determined to get stronger, he says he's thinking of going to the dungeon the next day, but when he looks to the side, he comes face to face with the red-haired guy from the guild. Shouting, he asks if the boy remembers him. The protagonist says no and walks away, leaving the guy talking to himself about his awful situation. Grabbing our boy, he begs to be heard, since his proposal could be beneficial for both of them, and realizing he managed to get their attention, he asks to join the duo. Smiling, the boy introduces himself as Lion, and says he's now an adventurer looking for allies. Raising his hand, Aruto thanks him for the offer, and says he won't accept, since a hero isn't all that useful, and he knows the guy was fired because he was found out, and is now trying to make quick money. Going on the offensive, the young man keeps begging, but Magica lands a blow and sends him flying away, then says she's hungry. Several days later, we see the protagonist fighting inside the dungeon. With quick strikes, he defeats several enemies, thanks to the dagger he created. Even knowing he's being followed, he decides to go to the next floor. However, he's caught off guard by Lion, fleeing from several wolves. Before throwing a fireball, our boy tells him to duck down. Shocked, the red-haired guy says he was following the boy and didn't even realize he'd reached the upper level. Furious, the protagonist yells, saying that this isn't a place for rookies. Turning around, he says he already warned him he doesn't have time to waste on someone like him. The young man apologizes, but is brutally attacked by a wolf. Our boy looks back and quickly finishes off the monster, but it seems to be too late. On his knees, he says that if he'd known it would end like this, he would have let the young man join his team. Suddenly Lion stands up and asks if Aruto is sure about that. Realizing he scared him with his resurrection, he reveals that he's a vampire, creatures said to be eternal, and that frighten people more than many monsters. Well, at least that's what the protagonist thought. The young man says he's not that different from humans, just a bit tougher, and in a way immortal. Our boy asks how he got such an ability. Without going into too much detail, the vampire says it's a long story, and reveals that he's also quite tolerant to pain. When asked whether it's possible for humans to have those abilities, he denies it. He says that in fact he doesn't belong to that world. We find out that Lion lived in Japan as a normal human, but died in an accident, and ended up reincarnating. That way his pain tolerance was acquired shortly afterward. We go back to the young man's past, when after being reborn, he thought he was the protagonist of a fantasy story. But after a few years, reality hit when a vampire hunt was carried out by the Fortemis Church. After his parents' death, he was judged a heretic for being immortal, and was given torture sessions as punishment. Many times the little one wished to die, but ended up living that horror for 50 years, until becoming immune to any kind of pain. One day he saw an opening, and fled the church. He lived hidden for hundreds of years until he reached that city, and started working at the guild. The story leaves the protagonist speechless, and for having brought that up he apologizes. The vampire says it's fine, but that he still thinks about how he wishes he could have saved his family. That's why he became an adventurer, since he wants to become stronger. Realizing how similar they are, our boy decides to accept having one more ally. Glancing sideways, he warns that his training is tough, while thinking that he can't leave someone like Lion alone. After that conversation, he began the lessons. Elsewhere in the dungeon, the protagonist gives it his all against demonic ants. Still being weak, the vampire ends up surrounded and asks for help. Finishing off the enemies, Aruto suggests he stop fighting like a human, since he's much stronger. Grabbing the sword and following the advice, the young man delivers a brutal blow to the creatures. Shocked by such strength, our boy asks how great his apprentice's existential power is. He says he's at level 4. Just like Magica, the duo kept increasing their power, especially Lion, who was evolving much faster, which made conquering the dungeon much easier, especially after the skeleton girl joined them. Thus, the trio made it to the last floor, where a huge monster was defeated. Surprised, the girl says she never thought the day they would defeat the 90th boss would come. Knowing his time is running out, the protagonist says the real fight is about to begin. A few days later, he closes his account at the inn, because his next destination is Euphonia Academy, in the capital. The vampire and the skeleton girl show up and ask if it's true. The young man is going to leave the city. Our boy says he meant to say goodbye, while thinking about how he only has 1 year to save Hana, and that the next time he fights Gamazin, it will be a battle to the death. The girl says she'll go with him, because she still has a debt to repay. Lion says he's going too, since he needs to accompany his teacher. Finding the whole situation very cute, Aruto accepts having company on his journey. The trio sets off in a wagon. Bored, the vampire asks how long it will take to arrive. The protagonist suggests he start training on his own to pass the time, but the young man says he won't do that. Magica asks what the plan is when they arrive in Euphonia. Being very direct, our boy says he's going to enroll in the academy. The red-haired guy says there's nothing he can learn there, and asks what the reason for that would be. Suddenly, a tremor interrupts the conversation. The coachman says the wheel got stuck in a crack and it won't be possible to complete the trip. Upon hearing that they'll need to walk, Lion says he'll handle it, and Doiti, saying that the coachman can return to the city with the horse, he lifts up a chunk of the ground along with the carriage, and running, he says he will reach the destination. After some time traveling, he asks if it was useful, while the pair are completely dismantled inside the carriage. The protagonist punches him in the head, stating that the next time the young man does something reckless, he will be kicked off the team, and seeing that they are already very close to the capital, he asks if the pair can take care of the luggage. Our boy runs off, excited to reunite with Hana. We see the girl who, all of a sudden, starts to feel something strange, as if someone she really wanted to see were nearby. Beside her, a young man says it must be because the girl's destined one is close. However, she will only know when she meets him, since that is how destiny works. Lion and Magica finally arrive at the royal capital, and the young man says the city has a hero vibe. When asked what that means, he says that in his old world, a hero would usually travel to that kind of place. Not understanding, Aruto points out where the king lives, the nobles' residences, and the Fortemis church, which the vampire prefers to stay away from. Next, at an inn, Aruto says he needs to prepare for the entrance exam to the Royal Academy, and that since the place also has a dungeon and a guild, things will not be too difficult. Quickly, he heads to the exam site alone, where many people are waiting to enter. The protagonist decides to take a walk before the test, and as he passes by a bench, remembers when he used to have snacks there with Hana. Suddenly a commotion catches his attention. Approaching, he asks what his allies are doing there. Magica says she will also take the exam, because she wants to test her skills. Lion says that actually, she just wants to be a student, and ends up getting punched. Next, the protagonist finds out that, to take the exam, it is necessary to pay a fee, and to make matters worse, neither of them has enough money, since they spent it on other little things. Out of nowhere, a gust of wind starts, and a voice comments on how noisy that year's candidates are. Everyone wonders what is happening, until a man holding a staff appears and says that this is a place for civilized people. Our boy recognizes Deutsch, while the vampire stands up and asks whether it is not uncivilized to appear out of nowhere and use magic on someone. Aruto asks the young man to calm down and says that the man is one of the instructors. We find out that the mage is an unpleasant person, who always looks at someone's status and existence power. The man looks at the young man's sheet and tells him to give up and go back home, since, with such low power, he will not be able to enter the academy. Thanking him for the concern, the protagonist puts the money on the table and says that only the test will be able to say whether he will pass or not. The trio leaves, leaving Deutsch furious at such audacity. Inside the room, we see the trio doing an exercise. Our boy watches his friends and is happy to see them focused. The instructor approaches, and seeing the boy making an effort, thinks to himself that he will personally take care of him in the practical exam. When the time comes, the mage reveals that those who destroy the box in front of him will pass the test. Using any method, however, no one should think it will be an easy task. Sometime later, we see that several candidates have failed, including a boy who used a giant hammer and could not even cause a crack. Thinking, the instructor says that it is only idiots again. It is Magica's turn, and in the audience, Lion encourages her, until the girl tells him to shut up. Deutsch thinks the young woman's name sounds familiar, and judging her for being half-beast, states that she will surely use brute force, which will not help at all, since his strengthening magic is the best in the country. The girl tosses the cube upward, and then throws a punch, making the item split in half with a single blow. The scene leaves everyone shocked, except the young woman's friends, who are happy with the result. The instructor thinks to himself that the gauntlet struck the same spot several times, with incredible speed and precision, and ends up remembering that Magica is one of the beings deemed dangerous by the Pope. The next to take the test is Lion, who with just one sword strike breaks not only the cube but the stone altar the object was on. With the pieces of the box in his hand, he asks if he passed. Perplexed, Deutsch says it is the first time he has seen someone do that, and after the young man leaves, he announces that he will take a short break so that repairs can be made to the structure. Inside a room, an old man questions what is happening with that year's candidates. A man asks whether it is right to let Esquelete and the vampire pass, while another says that the duo could be a great asset in the future because of their existence power. The instructor agrees with that last statement, and says that if he can teach them, the youngsters will certainly become excellent students. Thoughtfully, he says that the real problem is Aruto, who, being weak, could die and stain the Academy's honor. Thus, his duty will be to ensure that the young man fails at any cost. We see that the man has reinforced the cube's strengthening magic. Back at the training field, he announces the continuation of the exam. It is revealed that the spell the mage used makes the cube more resistant, as the person uses more force. But to his surprise, the next one to enter is not the protagonist. A blonde young man begins the test, leaving the instructor irritated by his lack of mana control. Then he is relieved to realize that, indeed, the boy with existence power at level 1 would not pass. Suddenly, flames burst from the cube and throw the boy backward. The box, which was blue before, turns red. A tornado begins and hurls Deutsch away. Magica and Lion wonder what is happening. Meanwhile, our boy quickly realizes that the lad's mana is out of control. Jumping down, he asks his friends to evacuate the audience. Right at the center of the tornado, the mage tries to protect himself using defensive magic. Then he approaches the boy and realizes that his mana is being depleted. Arms of wind fly toward him, forcing him to create a shield. But it quickly breaks. Luckily for the man, Aruto appears and says it is better for him to get out of there along with the boy, because he will take care of the mess, shouting. The instructor says that someone like him cannot do anything, and that the box will cause a huge explosion if it is touched carelessly. Without listening, Aruto focuses and begins to use his magic, leaving the teacher perplexed by his ability to neutralize mana. Small cuts begin to open on the protagonist's skin, but soon after, the red tornado dissipates. Relieved, he picks up the cube and says that he knows the man cast the Yahello spell on it, having no idea that, when very weak magic is applied to such a spell, everything becomes unstable. When asked who he really is, our boy says he is just an inferior being who has one existence power. However, even someone like that is capable of breaking the cube if they work hard. With nothing else to do, the instructor says that the boy passed the test. Sometime later, a man congratulates Lion and Aruto for having entered the Royal Academy. The protagonist says that the uniform suits his friend, but only when he keeps his mouth shut. Magica shows up and asks whether the shopkeeper has something more comfortable, since she cannot move properly in that outfit. Our boy says the young woman looks like a noble, while the vampire teases her about her thin legs. The trio heads to the register and finds out they will have to pay 10 gold coins per person. Knowing that his friends have no money, the protagonist offers to pay, but the pair refuse and say they will figure something out. Then they say it is time to look for a highly rewarding request at the guild as quickly as possible. Sometime later, we see Lion outraged that the board only has cheap requests. Magica says she found one that pays 30 gold coins. However, it is necessary to subdue the fire dragon that lives on the northern mountain. Aruto steps forward and says that is impossible, since dragons are legendary creatures known for destroying an entire country on their own. As he explains, the protagonist remembers when he fought one in his past life and barely escaped, even though he was level 99. The vampire says the reward is wrong, since it is not proportional to the risk. When asked whether the request is fake, he says that in that case the inspection department should have rejected it. Thinking, our boy concludes that there is something behind the request, and curious, decides to see where it leads. We see that a mysterious woman listens to the trio's conversation from afar and seems to like what she hears. A week later, Esquelete wipes out a giant boar. Intrigued, she says that they have searched everywhere and found nothing. Aruto says the sun will set soon, therefore it is better for them to set up camp. When night falls, the group lights a campfire and gathers to have a quick bite. The protagonist says that if they sell the materials and the magic stones, it might already be enough to pay for the uniforms. Then he takes the opportunity and reveals that he has a present. Showing the necklaces, the young man explains that he made them with his forging skill and put everything he has into the pendant. Enchanted, Magica says she can feel the power. Our boy says that it is a thank you for the fact that the two of them keep him company and make him happy. Later, the three sleep in the cabin, until the protagonist wakes up, wondering why it is so hot. To his surprise, the forest is on fire, and the red dragon is standing there staring at him. The beast opens its mouth, showing how powerful it is. Dumbfounded, Aruto realizes that the guild's request was real. Lion appears and is shocked, while the protagonist says they need to run, even if that means leaving the magic stones behind. The dragon launches a fireball and destroys the cabin where the items were. Magica asks her friend to look around, making him conclude that he has no choice but to fight. Realizing it is an inferior species, he says he needs to defeat enemies stronger than that one, because if he is overcome by fear, he will not be able to save Hannah. The boy casts the watercutter spell, determined to exploit the beast's weakness. However, the creature protects itself using a shield. Lion and the squirrel girl charge at the beast. Because she is faster, the girl manages to hit the enemy with a kick to the head, but she realizes that physical attacks did no damage because of the scales. The vampire asks the young woman to keep distracting the monster so he can use his sword. However, the plan goes wrong, and he is forced to run so he does not get toasted. Reflecting, our boy says it is very strange that the enemy suddenly changed targets. Shouting, he asks his friend to let himself be attacked while he reduces the force of the blow with his magic. Even terrified, the boy decides to trust his teacher, and using both hands, tries not to be crushed. Furious, the dragon starts roaring. The protagonist warns Magica that the creature's weak point is below the chin. Getting the message, the squirrel girl leaps and delivers a fatal strike using her power. Determined, she says the fight ends there. But suddenly, she ends up being hit by the beast's tail, and falls brutally to the ground, leaving the boys worried. Luckily, the necklace Aruto gave does its job and lessens the impact of the fall. The dragon takes the chance to crush the squirrel girl, but it quickly realizes she has disappeared. Just like the others, thanks to the protagonist, who used his ability to take them to a cave underground. Lion says he did not know the grave attribute could be used that way. Then he asks for healing potions, but the protagonist says they were all destroyed when the cabin caught fire. Rue appears and shows that, actually, he managed to grab a vial. After drinking the potion, Magica finally wakes up and apologizes for letting her guard down. Our boy asks her to stay there while they deal with the dragon. Disagreeing, the young woman says the burden will be too heavy if he goes outside with only the vampire. Agreeing, the protagonist says that in that case they need to come up with a strategy. Sometime later, we see the red-haired boy calling the creature a fat lizard, all to fulfill his part of the plan, which is to distract the enemy for a minute. Breaking a tree in half, he says he may not be that fast, but with his strength he will not lose to anyone. The dragon quickly turns the trunk to dust, but others appear amid the flames, forcing it to use its paws to defend itself. Aruto says he is done, then Lion hurls a huge rock, making the creature take flight and fall into the magic trap. Using his multi-hack skill, our boy immobilizes his opponent. It is the vampire's turn to act again. Approaching Magica, he asks her not to give up at that moment. Then the boy throws the squirrel girl upward. Well positioned, she activates her artifact and delivers her magnum strike. The dragon opens its mouth and protects itself using its flames, without realizing it has just made its weak point more visible. Running in with his sword, Lion gets close enough and delivers a decapitating blow. With the victory, the trio high-fives. The vampire asks if he can now call himself a dragon slayer. Aruto says yes, because the strike was perfect. Magica says she cannot accept the fact that the young man let the vampire finish it. However, she praises him right afterward, claiming he only said that to mess with them. Suddenly, the three of them start feeling pain from having leveled up. With 8 more levels, the protagonist leans on his friends and says that if they pass out, they'll wake up inside some monster's stomach. To prevent that from happening, he builds a stone wall and asks Rue to stand guard, while they rest and watch the moon. The next morning, Aruto wakes up and comes face to face with the dragon's magic stone. Hugging the little slime, he thanks it for all the help. Lion and Magica also wake up and are shocked by the size of the item, showing it isn't over. Aruto says there's a lot they can take to prove they defeated the dragon. Taking his dagger, he gets to work and says everything can be used, including the scales, which are good for armor, and the claws, which can be turned into swords. Not to mention the eyeball, which sells for a lot. However, the rarest material is definitely the heart. The sight makes the vampire pass out from sheer disgust. Curious, the squirrel girl asks how the heart can be used, and the protagonist says that if they keep it stored for 3 years, they can create a revitalization potion that can revive non-human beings. After dismantling the entire dragon, he says money won't be a concern for a while. Lion says an inventory skill would be good for carrying everything, since it allows storage in an interdimensional space. Knowing there's no such thing in that world, Aruto says they should take what they can and head back home. But to his surprise, Ruto shows up and hands him a bag it had kept inside its own body. A bit shocked, The young man asks if the little guy can carry all the materials. The creature opens its mouth and starts sucking up all the items, showing that in fact it is the inventory itself. The protagonist starts crying as he remembers all the times he had to choose what to take. The mysterious woman from before hears everything, hidden behind a tree, and says that indeed God's oracle was right, which makes her eager to see what comes next. Sometime later, at the guild, Lion shows the materials and says his party defeated the dragon from the request. But the receptionist says there are many ways to obtain those items, such as at auctions, so she won't be able to give the reward. Furious, the vampire shouts that the materials aren't second-hand. Meanwhile, Aruto reflects on how it's impossible to dodge fate, so when an action tries to do that, an interference quickly appears. Out loud, he says that even if it's shameful, it's better to give up and try to sell the items to get the money. Suddenly the mysterious girl appears and says the trio is going too far. When asked about her identity, she introduces herself as Citri Justice, the next head of the Justice family. The vampire tells the young woman not to meddle and ends up being called an idiot. Aruto tries to calm his friend, knowing he's dealing with someone from the Department of Truth, which belongs to the 12 generals of Euphonia. The girl examines one of the dragon's claws, and seeing that the spinal fluid is fresh, states that indeed it isn't second-hand material. Quickly the receptionist changes her mind and decides to buy everything. Stepping closer to the protagonist, Justice says she's eager to see his future. Sometime later, Lion is more than happy holding a bag with 150 gold coins. Thinking, our boy wonders why the girl whispered that in his ear, and whether it was because she knows about his plan, since he's been putting it all together for a decade. Inside the inn, he concludes he doesn't have time to change course, which means he'll have to press on. Elsewhere, we see Citri in the middle of a sword duel. After defeating her opponent, a young man declares his victory and asks if something happened, since she seems eager. Smiling, the girl says she finally found the weak one, thanks to the dragon subjugation request. We discover that, in that world, there is a belief that the only being capable of defeating a dragon alone is the weak one, the same one who will bring catastrophe to the world, known as one of the new dangerous beings. Justice says that when she faced the young man, she could see his spirit, and so she will expose the boy's true nature to everyone. On another day at school, all the students gather to see the class assignments announcement. Ryan sees his name on the list and realizes he'll be in Class C. Seeing that, the vampire is confused, but Magica explains that their friend's grades were terrible. Being provoked, the man asks which class the girl is going to. With sparkling eyes, she replies that she's going to Class A, the best of them all. At that moment, Alto comments that he was placed in Class D, which makes his friend laugh on the floor while asking what happened on the exam. The hero explains that it doesn't matter if his grades are good, since his magical presence is only 1 star, completely changing the mood. Aruto simply states that his school life isn't important, and that that's great. After the conversation, the trio says goodbye, and the protagonist heads toward his classroom. He tries to remember what will happen when he opens the door, and then he does. Inside the classroom, one of the students is talking about having failed to practice water magic. At that, the boy and his classmate spot the hero and start calling him peasant scum and an inferior student. Pretending to be friendly, the protagonist just smiles and wishes his classmate good luck with the training. Suddenly, one of the boys casts a water spell toward the hero, who quickly nullifies the attack with his defensive magic. Unbothered, Aruto just thinks that in his previous life, that magic looked incredible. One of the students is shocked, while another says the newcomer must be using some stolen magic armor. Excited, the boy starts getting ready to use his fire magic, but the protagonist doesn't care much about it. However, everything changes when he sees a girl entering the classroom. In an attempt to protect her, the hero quickly leaps toward his classmate. He ends up landing a powerful punch on the wall and warns that using attack magic in the classroom is dangerous. After the scolding, the hero looks back and comes face to face with Hannah. Then he approaches to explain to the girl that someone was using magic and that she doesn't need to worry about it. As he steps away, the protagonist starts to cry while telling himself that he must not get involved with her. He understands that he has only 5 more years to live and that he'll end up leaving her alone again this time. In the present moment, there are only 4 months left until Hana's death, and thinking about that, Aruto tells himself that he will protect her. Hana was born as an heiress, and because of that, her parents provided an elite education during her childhood. However, one day she ended up overhearing her teacher say that his student had no kind of talent. The man explains that the little girl has 4 stars of presence, but that on the other hand, she has nothing to build on that foundation. Without mincing words, the teacher simply states that his student is incompetent. Hearing that, Hana tried to push herself for 10 years, but she always failed. Her level never went up, and as a result she ended up being abandoned by everyone around her, including her own father. She only managed to enter this school through a political consideration on the institution's part, due to her family name. As she walks through the corridors, the blonde thinks that no one should see her, and that her goal is to hide her own existence at this school. Upon entering the classroom, Hana ends up remembering when her mother explained what it means to have a soulmate. At that exact moment, the hero appears and instantly, she understands that this boy is her soulmate. Sometime later, in martial arts class, the teacher states that he will expel anyone who isn't motivated. Alto is training with the dagger, when suddenly the teacher tries to strike him, but the hero manages to dodge. Startled, the boy questions his teacher. The man in turn asks the student to hand over his dagger, and questions why he has such a high-grade and rare weapon. In this case, the protagonist had obtained that weapon by defeating the dragon, but that is information he cannot reveal. The teacher simply warns that relying on weapons won't make skills grow, and says he will keep the weapon until the boy's level increases. Seeing this, the classmates comment that Professor Levanti is an A-rank adventurer, and that his gaze is merciless. Suddenly, the man comes at the boy with everything, asking why he's taking so long to answer. Quickly, the hero manages to dodge Levanti's attacks. The teacher says that the boy has a lot of guts to avoid his attacks, and that he's very lucky. With that, the man proposes a challenge. He states that if he can't touch the student even once, then the student can keep the dagger. Looking around, the protagonist thinks that this wouldn't be a good thing for a teacher to do, since he's abandoning the lesson. Without wasting time, the man charges in and warns that he's going to take advantage of it, even if his student is a commoner. However, the hero manages to dodge all of his teacher's attacks. Seeing the student's skill, Levanti thinks he's just a lucky kid. Willing to do anything, the man uses his wind magic to pull the student in. Despite the effort, the protagonist manages to dodge again. At that moment, those students start cheering for the teacher. Suddenly, the man uses his wind magic again, forcing the hero to use lightning step to escape. In an instant, Alto jumps up into a tree, yellow flash style. Irritated, the teacher wonders why he can't lay a hand on the brat, and says he didn't escape successfully. The man points out that the student's shirt is torn and says that counts as his victory. Surprised, the protagonist thinks to himself that he definitely wasn't touched. Alto argues that the tear was caused by the pressure of the magical wind, but his teacher says that's a false accusation. At that, the two students who were watching say they saw the teacher touch the boy. Nervous, Hana realizes this is all a lie, because the hero's movements were far too fast for anyone to follow. Holding out his hand, the teacher demands that the dragon dagger be handed over. However, Magica steps in, saying she saw everything, and states that not a single finger touched him. The girl even questions whether this man is really a teacher. At that, Levanti starts to get nervous, and thinks he could get into trouble if he starts arguing. He then says the beast man must be right, since he has special vision. Magica then tells her friend that she wouldn't let this guy get away with it, even if it was just a game, and Alto thanks her. With a friendly smile, Levanti suggests the two of them start again. He uses Wind Slash, and explains that this is a high-level technique that coats his hand in magic. Quickly, the man leaps toward the target, but the hero manages to dodge. However, this magic, besides increasing range, is also an attack that scatters blades of wind. In his mind, the teacher understands he wouldn't have any problems even if the boy kicked the bucket, since he's just a commoner. The hero then focuses to use his speed at the absolute limit. He waits until the last moment, and without any difficulty, manages to dodge all the wind blades. Irritated, Levanti wonders if this student wasn't just an inferior, with a 1-star presence power. He wonders if there isn't some human who can surpass presence power, but quickly changes his mind, thinking he's not well today. At that, the man picks up a sword that was on the ground. He charges at the boy while thinking to himself that he can't afford to lose. Seeing that the man picked up the sword, the protagonist simply says he's a hopeless person. Even so, the boy stays calm, since class will end soon and all he needs to do is dodge this attack. However, those two students say the hero must be using some trick to dodge the attacks and that he should play fair. The two grab the hero's legs while telling the teacher that this is his chance. Quickly, the man rushes at the boy with his sword. However, the protagonist uses his lightning step and manages to dodge the attack while also throwing the sword away. As a result, the teacher ends up crashing face first into a puddle of mud, and that's how class ends. Alto, in turn, says that this man was blinded by greed and self-importance. After the lecture, the sword that went flying ends up falling near his opponent's face, leaving him completely terrified. The hero then looks at one of his classmates, and with a friendly smile asks them to let go of his leg, and they do. On the way out of class, the students comment that Professor Levanti was incredible. Frustrated, the protagonist realizes that his actions don't stay in anyone's memory. Studying his classmates, he begins to feel the power of the magic cast over this world once again. Suddenly Magica appears and punches his arm. With a frightening look, she says her friend is far too careless and shouldn't let someone get him from behind. In addition, his friend also warns that the hero will have to take part in her training after class as punishment. From afar, Hana just watches the two talking. By late afternoon, the blonde is training with her wooden sword, while wondering why no one praised Alto. The blonde understands that the teacher was also incredible, but wonders if she was the only one who had seen that the hero had a clear advantage. In an incredible way, the girl had even noticed that the protagonist kept his eyes closed several times and understands that she wouldn't be able to imitate him. Frustrated, the blonde asks if the reason is because she has no gift at all. However, Hana chooses to stop thinking about it and focus on training. She ends up injuring her hand with the sword and starts crying, saying that she wanted to be strong. Suddenly, the hero enters the training room. Awkwardly, the protagonist apologizes, saying that the in-use sign wasn't visible. However, the girl calls out to the hero and asks if they can talk for a bit. She introduces herself as Hana Colonel and says the boy's feat was incredible, since no ordinary person had ever managed to escape the instructor like that. Curious, the blonde asks how he became so strong. At the same time, the hero starts to get nervous about the whole situation, because he only has 5 years of life ahead of him and doesn't want to hurt her in the future. As he leaves, the protagonist only replies that he probably managed that feat because of his training. Suddenly, Colonel takes Aruto's hand, leaving him completely confused. Realizing what she did, the girl pulls away, and embarrassed, apologizes. At that, the hero simply watches her, thinking that she hasn't changed at all. Getting straight to the point, the blonde asks if the boy could train her. She explains that she has never managed to improve, even with excellent teachers, and that many have already given up on her. Bravely, she says that she wants to be trained by him. Nervous, Hana apologizes and asks if she's bothering him. At that moment, the protagonist looks at her injured hands and understands that this is the route in which there is no relationship at all with her. Not knowing what the best path is, the hero simply extends his hand and says he'll do what he can to help her. Hearing that, she is moved and thanks him, saying she'll do her best. Suddenly, someone shouts that they heard everything. It's Rion, who had been watching the conversation. He quickly introduces himself to the girl. Magica also introduces herself, saying her name. And at that moment, the blonde asks if the girl is a member of the royal family, and she confirms it. Hearing that, Rion is confused, and his companion just comments that she had never said that before. Assessing the situation, the vampire asks whether it would be acceptable for someone like her to be royalty. Irritated, the girl simply teaches him a good lesson. Frightened by the situation, Hana asks if they should stop her, but the hero explains that Rion is quite tough, and that everything will be fine. The boy explains that his friend was very weak at first, but now he can even defend himself against Magica. A few days later, on the outskirts of Euphonia, the group meets up and begins exploring the forest. At one point, Magica asks about the new member's existence power, and she replies that it is 4. However, she explains that she doesn't have any kind of gift, and that because of that, her level has remained the same. At that, the 2 members of the group are surprised, and ask if that isn't impossible, which makes the blonde insecure. Alto asks his vampire friend to calm down, but he says that actually this is something incredible. Rion explains that people say a gift is like a talent for human growth, but that it can be seen from another perspective. He then asks whether her way of life isn't being restricted. The man states that not having a gift means you can choose your own way of life. Hearing that, the hero realizes his friend is right. Moved, Hana comments that this is the first time someone has spoken that way about her not having a gift. Aruto says it's so good that he can't even believe it came from Rion. Sometime later, the group ends up reaching the final part of the forest. Curious, the blonde asks about the training they're going to do, and whether it involves something using trees. With a smile on his face, the protagonist simply replies that it's practical combat. He states that now the girl will fight real monsters, which scares her. However, Colonel argues that it's impossible to fight a monster now, since she is only level 1. But the hero merely comments that he won't let her get hurt. At this moment, several goblins appear at the location. The group grows wary, and Magica says that the leader didn't need to draw such a large group of goblins. However, Alto comments that he has a plan, and whispers it to his 2 partners. After hearing it, both agree with the idea. The group then begins the battle, and the 3 more experienced ones head toward the enemies. Magica quickly dodges one of the attacks and argues that it wouldn't be efficient to defeat them one by one. With that in mind, the girl makes a huge leap and crushes several opponents upon landing. Meanwhile, the protagonist uses his magic to deal with the monsters. Without thinking twice, he unleashes his attack and defeats several goblins without difficulty. From afar, the blonde girl simply watches everyone's strength and says it's incredible. However, a goblin hidden in the bushes appears behind the rookie to attack her. Quickly, Alto steps in front to protect her and finishes the monster without mercy. Worried, he asks if the girl got hurt, and she replies that she didn't. Meanwhile, Rion ends up getting caught by the goblins. Fallen on the ground, he asks for help. The girl in turn calls for the hero, who replies that he can't help because he's busy. He immediately asks the rookie to save his friend, which leaves her very distressed. Seeing this, the hero says it's okay, because she can attack from behind, which is a safe strategy. The protagonist smiles because everything is going according to his plan. His plan was to use Rion's ability to draw the attention of all the goblins indefinitely. That way, the rookie would be able to defeat at least 1 goblin on her own. Naruto understands that he and Magica will handle the rest, and that the most important thing is to see whether Hang has the courage to defeat a monster or not. With the sword in hand, the girl starts trembling, but soon tries to remember all her training so she can do something. That way she decides to charge in and ends up hitting one of the goblins, but her strike was far too shallow to finish the monster. Faced with her weakness, the rookie starts getting irritated because she isn't managing to protect her friend. As she cries, she asks herself why she is so weak. At that moment, the hero calls out to Colonel to tell her he believes in her. Those words give the girl a bit of confidence. Then she rushes at the goblin while telling herself she will have the courage to become strong as long as Alto is by her side. That way the blonde lands another blow with her sword. This blow isn't enough, so she decides to attack once more. From atop a tree, one of the goblins shoots an arrow to hit her while she is distracted. However, Magica intervenes and throws the arrow back at the enemy. At that moment, Hana prepares for the final strike. She makes a big leap and lands a precise blow on the goblin, finishing it. After all that adrenaline, the girl starts to faint, but Alto catches her. Colonel apologizes and says she's feeling dizzy. The hero then replies that this nausea happens because of leveling up. Hearing that, the girl can't believe it and starts crying profusely. At that, the protagonist smiles, because he understands the girl had been waiting for this for 15 years. Breaking the mood, Ryon asks how much longer he still has to lie there like that. Seeing the redhead completely banged up, Colonel asks if he's okay, and he replies that those attacks don't even tickle. Ryon then explains that this was a plan to help her find her courage. The hero suggests a break so the rookie can calm down, but she disagrees and asks to continue. In that case, the protagonist calls for Q. He hands the dragonbone longsword to the rookie and says it's a weapon he made especially for her. Hanada is fascinated by the beauty of the blade. Looking back, the girl sees several goblins approaching. Now with more confidence, the heroine charges at the enemies with her new sword, but with a single attack, she manages to split the ground in half. Startled, the blonde explains that she can't master such an incredible sword. However, the hero explains that the tools someone has end up forging that person, and that this sword will make her even stronger. Then he smiles and asks Colonel to believe in herself, and says he will gradually increase the number of her opponents. That way, Hana continues her training, eliminating several goblins throughout the forest. Sometime later, the protagonist asks if the girl got hurt, because she worked hard, but she replies that she's fine. Curious, he asks how much her level increased, and the blonde starts checking. Seeing the result, the heroine and Alto are shocked. She is level 31, and obtained the gift Hero's Egg. Both the hero and the vampire are confused by the gift, because they have never heard of anything like it. However, Magica is startled, and wonders if Hana was actually the person she had been searching for all this time. It is explained that in this world, there are 6 pillars of the gods. The first is Largo, who presides over war; Diatonic, who presides over life and birth; Zamatis, who presides over technology, along with Nisus, who presides over souls and destiny; Fortemis, who presides over justice and order. The 6th pillar, meanwhile, concerns the main deity of the squirrel tribe, Amano Irihoha, who presides over nature. Magica is the princess of that tribe, and because of that, she received a divine oracle from the god Amano Irihoha, together with the hero who will transform this world. In this way, she was given the mission of finding the bearer of the gift, and making that person her right hand. She has been doing so ever since the girl met Alto and began traveling with him. Now the girl sees that she has finally found the heroine in question. The noblewoman thinks that the fact that she is still an egg is the work of the god Fortemis. It is said that the Church of Fortemis has the largest number of believers in the world, and in this way influences the kingdom of Euphonia, where the group is. To protect justice and order, the church would eliminate any existence that was inconvenient to it. Magica theorizes that the reason Hana's gift was sealed is because most likely that power was an obstacle to Fortemis. To complete the theory, the squirrel girl also thinks it was Alto who broke the seal. Thus, she understands that following the boy was the right choice, and that now she should be able to make this egg hatch. Suddenly, the protagonist calls to her and asks if she has any idea what this egg might be. Magica replies that she doesn't, because she understands it is still far too early to say. Changing the subject, the newcomer asks if she can go home, since dawn has already come. She says her butler will be worried, and Alto agrees, saying her level has already risen more than enough. At that, the girl comments that she has a request to make of the hero. Awkwardly, she invites him to her house. Alto then accepts, and says it would be better if he himself explained the reason for her being late. At that moment, the hero remembers that in his past life, he took Hana home, and that at the time the butler got very angry because she got hurt. A short while later, the two arrive at the mansion, and Alto thinks the house is magnificent, even though he has seen it many times before. Colonel explains that the first head of her family was one of the people who founded the kingdom of Euphonia. All the successive heads after that man were outstanding and played various important roles in this country. The boy asks if she will succeed them, and the newcomer replies that she will. She says this is why her incompetence is such a big problem. Sometime later in the room, the girl asks the hero to wait for her for a moment. At that moment, the protagonist looks to the side and remarks that the butler, who was hiding, can come out now. Introducing himself, the man says his name is Klein, that he works as the chief butler of the Colonel family, and that he took the liberty of observing him. Alto then asks whether the butler has business to settle in private, and he says the young man's quick intuition is helpful. Getting straight to the point, Klein asks what the hero's purpose is in getting close to Lady Hannah. The man comments that there are about 30 classmates in Class D, and asks why the young man chose her specifically. Alto understands he cannot say it is mere coincidence, because it is public knowledge that the Colonel family is of the highest nobility. In reply, the hero says he felt an affinity with the girl because she has no gift. He explains that his power is only 1 star, and that because of that, he understands the feelings of those who have nothing. Hearing that, Klein says the young man must have gone through many hardships. As he serves tea, the butler says that the lady has been smiling more in recent days, and that this must have happened thanks to Master Alto. Smiling, the man says he is grateful to the young man for that. Changing the subject, Klein asks what kind of relationship the hero wants to have with Hannah in the future. At that moment, the protagonist remembers the moments he had with his beloved. However, he replies that he hopes the two of them will be good friends. At that, the butler spills the tea, as he calls the young man a brat. With a knife in hand, the man calls him a mere peasant, and tells him not to get ahead of himself. The man says that this relationship is absurd, and warns the boy never to get involved with Lady Hannah again. In his mind, the hero is taken aback by the sudden change in the butler's attitude. It was exactly as it happened in his past life, when he ended up hurting Hannah and angering the man. He understands that it is as if emotions are being manipulated by something invisible, this being the power of the magical rule cast upon this world by Fortemis. The protagonist knows that staying silent is bad, because that would be repeating his past life. At that, the boy simply vanishes from the sofa in an instant. From afar he asks why he is not allowed to get involved with Miss Hannah. In response, the butler says that associating with a peasant is seen as a loss of dignity by the ducal house. He also says that the young man has level 1 existence power and asks whether there is anyone with less dignity. Arguing back, Aruto says that the one losing dignity is the man. The boy explains that Miss Hannah grew stronger during training and will receive a good ranking in Class D. Indignant, the protagonist asks what the butler has done for the girl over these 15 years. Alto says that none of them did anything because she stayed at level 1 that whole time, without trying to gain power and only keeping up appearances. Quickly, the hero starts jumping from one side of the room to the other. He says there are 5 butlers in this room. Showing his weapons, the young man says Klein seems to be the strongest butler, but that all of their combined strength is limited. The boy then asks how all the butlers would stop the fight if it happened. He asks whether the butlers could stop him using ducal dignity or something like that. At that moment, Colonel enters the room, apologizing for the delay, and says she will show the way through the house. The noblewoman asks why the butler is in the room. Smiling, the hero says the two of them were talking. Standing up, the boy says he hopes to meet the butler again, and the man in turn agrees. As he walks down the corridor, the protagonist understands that people may judge him as if he had hostile intentions toward the ducal house. That way the hero understands that this was the only way to make everyone feel that sense of crisis. Because in the tragedy of his past life, all of them ended up being wiped out, and the situation could have been different if they had been prepared. Suddenly Hannah calls for her master, and remarks that it is rare to see him so distracted. Then the girl opens the door to show the room. The hero is surprised, because in his past life the most he managed was to enter the reception room. However, the girl warns that actually, this is her room. She adds that it is a custom among nobles to invite close friends into their room, and that she did it to express her gratitude. Aruto explains that the young woman worked hard to become stronger, and that he only helped a little. Hearing that, Colonel starts smiling, saying she already knew he would say that. However, her expression suddenly changes, as if she wanted to confess her feelings. Realizing the situation, the hero remembers that, in his past life, Hannah was the one who confessed, asking him to date her. Despite wanting that, the protagonist understands that he cannot accept in this life. The hero knows that if he accepts her confession, he will form an attachment and start dreaming of a happy future. That way, the tragedy could be repeated. Nervous, the boy tells himself that he needs to refuse for her sake. Colonel then begins to brace herself to gather courage. With her eyes closed, she asks whether the hero does not want to become her best friend. This confession leaves the protagonist in shock. Hearing that, Alto drops to his knees on the floor, because he was sure she was going to confess. The blonde girl is confused when she sees this. Suddenly the boy stands up and says he will accept the proposal. Hearing that answer, the girl becomes very happy and thanks him. Colonel thought about telling the hero to become her love, but she understands that there is no need to rush that. Already near the exit, the blonde thanks him for everything. While walking down the corridor, something catches Aruto's attention. It is a shining sword. Colonel explains that this is a sword made from a very rare ore called orichalcum. It is said that this sword was made for the first head of the family after the War of the Gods. The noblewoman also comments that this is a family heirloom that no one has been able to use to this day. She explains that some kind of restriction was placed on the sword. A limitation was imposed to fight to protect everything that is important in the world, and because of that, it became unusable when the country was founded. Naruto says that the reason is that protecting your own country means not being able to protect what is important to other countries. Changing the subject, the blonde asks if he does not want to stay for dinner, but the hero refuses the request. Naruto explains that it will cause problems if he stays in that house until night, because he is a commoner. Before saying goodbye, the protagonist approaches the girl and says that from now on they are best friends. As he leaves, the hero understands that there are only 7 hours left until Hana's death. Sometime later, the protagonist arrives at the inn and asks Rue whether the magic stones were sold. In response, the slime just tosses coins around the room. Happy about the sales, the boy says he needs to ask Magica and the others to stop by to see Hana. The hero then asks his friend to go to Rion's or Magica's room that night. He says he has something he needs to do alone. Suddenly, the mascot starts crying in despair because the two of them haven't had a chance to talk alone lately. Sometime later, already at night, the protagonist is at the window while Rue takes a nap. The protagonist realizes that the time has finally come. He understands that soon that man will be heading to the Colonel house, and that Gamijin will appear on that road. The reason the boy chose this room was with that in mind. At that moment, he opens the status screen and wonders whether he'll be able to defeat Gamijin with these stats. With a trembling hand, the hero starts thinking about the possibility of failing again. However, he says he can't be a coward, and that there's no point thinking about that now, because all that's left is to fight. That night, the Colonel family's house was in flames. The protagonist ran desperately toward the mansion. When he got there, he saw the hooded man facing the butler. Gamijin had said that Hana needed to die due to the royal decree. Frightened, the butler questions why the man is doing this, and asks if that's what a general of Euphonia does. Mockingly, the villain replies that the 12 generals of Euphonia are the executive force that serves the king. Smiling, Gamijin says that this is an order from the king, something completely legitimate. In shock, Hana's mother asks why the king ordered her daughter's death. Drawing his sword, Klein says he will not tolerate that kind of order. Charging in, the man says he will show no mercy to his opponent. However, his sword is stopped by a single finger, a clear reference to Ichigo's fight against Aizen. The general brings his hand close to the butler's face and eliminates him with his magic, saying he felt nothing from that fight. Behind a tree, the hero just watches everything while trembling with fear. At that moment, the hooded man approaches the family to finish the job. Then the woman tells her daughter that everything will be fine and that she will protect her. Spreading her arms, the noblewoman tells the general not to come any closer and asks if his goal is to destroy the house. He replies that the house will be safe in the future and that the plan was to eliminate the whole family, but Chief Colonel accepted the proposal. Gamijin reveals that the family's father sacrificed his incompetent daughter so he could save himself. After the revelation, the man simply finishes off the mother with a single blow. Seeing her mother fallen on the ground, Hana begins to despair. The general, in turn, loves seeing the expression of fear on his target's face. With a terrifying smile, the man approaches and asks whether humans really exist, because to him, the people in this world don't seem to have free will, possibly being illusions created by the god's magic. The man says he has carried out various experiments, but he hasn't been able to decipher anything. Holding his target's face, the general asks whether the girl is an illusion or a human being like him. With a trembling voice, Colonel replies that she is human. Changing his expression, Gamijin asks who said she could speak. Restraining the blonde girl's hands, the man says he was talking to the soul. Without holding back, the general casts a fatal spell on the girl. At that moment, the hero appears, calling out to his friend. Annoyed, the hooded man looks back and ends up paralyzing the boy's body. Quickly, the general approaches the kid. Staring deep into his eyes, he says the young man will not leave this place alive. With 2 spheres of energy in his hands, the general says the boy deserves to die 1,000 times. However, the hooded man soon realizes he can't finish off someone who has no connection to the Colonel family. He only says that the young man will become his observer, and that now he will eliminate Miss Hana. That way her pain will mix with the hero's despair, and thus Gamijin will feel like a real human. The protagonist despairs, but the villain comments that presence is the law of this world, a principle created by the gods. With a large sphere of energy in his hands, the general says the boy's presence is weak and that because of that he won't be able to stop anything. Then, the man finishes off his target without pity and concludes his mission. He comments that it was disappointing because he felt absolutely nothing. Then, he approaches the kid and delivers a hard kick, sending him flying away. Lying on the ground, Alto understands that all of this is his fault. Sometime later, Hana was found in a stream, as if she had taken her own life. People tried to cover up the incident so as not to stain the family's honor, and for that reason they even forged a letter as if it were from her. Returning to the present, the protagonist is focused on the window because there is only 1 hour left until the blonde's death. Suddenly, the shadow of a man appears in the street. The boy heads toward him and introduces himself as a simple peasant named Alto. At that moment, the kid asks whether the man is Gamijin Solsui. Then, the man confirms that he is, and tells the young man to go away because he is a very busy person. However, the hero says that won't be possible, and that he came to stop a foolish act. Changing his expression, the general merely explains that he is carrying out a decree from the king, and that he will eliminate any nuisance. At that moment, Alto begins to tremble because of his opponent's intimidation. Quickly, the man closes in and starts landing several blows with his staff. Irritated, he asks whether the commoner has no sense of his own place. Seeing the young man's hateful gaze, the hooded man becomes even more irritated. In a fit of fury, he lands a powerful blow on the protagonist, making him fall from the spot. As he approaches, the general remarks that there really are tough children, since even a touch could destroy them. However, the hero reveals that he is fine, and points his dagger at Solsui. The man is shocked by the boy's strength. At that moment, Alto gains the resistance of inequality, and his presence level finally rises to 2 stars. But his opponent manages to block the attack with a kind of magical shield. The man is shocked, because a brat with 1-star existence power shouldn't be able to move like that. In his mind, Alto understands that he managed to adapt to this difference in existence power because he trained with Rician and Magica for years. Moreover, his existence power increased, which until then would have been something immutable in this world. This would be the power of the natural gift called creation, which the hero managed to awaken. The general remarks that he doesn't know what trick the young man used, but that it doesn't change the outcome at all. At that moment he casts a spell toward the boy. Alto manages to dodge the attacks while feeling his body lighter, and he also realizes he can release more mana than before. That way he can unleash any magic to protect the people he loves. At that moment, Alto launches an attack with the 4 elements combined: fire, ice, wind, and water. Seeing that, the hooded man is dumbfounded. The hero knows this is not a weak opponent, and because of that, he decided to end everything in a single blow. In response, the general launches a dark attack toward the boy. The 2 spells collide, and in that way the protagonist's 4 attacks are nullified. Still hoping to win, the hero uses his water sphere. This attack causes a mist to form around the battle. Appearing like a ninja, Alto comes up behind his opponent with a dagger in hand. However, the man manages to dodge with some ease. Solsui remarks that he'll be concerned if the brat underestimates the 12 generals. The hero in turn grows nervous because of the hooded man's agility. Even so, he decides not to miss the next chance and charges at his opponent. This time, the man manages to dodge, but only just. Not wanting to waste time, Gamijin creates his dome around his own body. This dome is a sensory net with high-density mana, which allows him to feel any movement a person makes or any flow of mana. Without thinking twice, Alto runs toward the dome and partially enters it. At that, the general announces the kid's end, and then launches an attack in his direction. However, the direction of the attack ends up changing course. Then, quickly, the protagonist closes in. Confused, the man wonders how the young man did that, since he didn't sense any activation of magic. With the dagger in hand, Alto declares that this is the end. However, the boy ends up striking a post instead of the enemy. At that moment, the man asks the young man what he did to change the attack's trajectory. It is explained that this was a kind of hack the protagonist prepared for this battle. The hero had used steam to confuse his opponent's sense of position, to guide him to the prepared point. However, his plan ended up being thwarted by a distance of just 1 step. In disbelief, the boy thinks he never had a chance to win from the beginning, if this was divine interference. Revealing his plans, the man remarks that the oracle of the god Fortimus was to get rid of the hero's egg as quickly as possible. Upon hearing that, Aruto is surprised and wonders how the hooded man knows about Hana's natural gift, which only manifested today. Curious, the protagonist asks whether the general knows anything about the hero's egg. At that, Solsui asks if the young man has ever heard of the natural gift called hero. This is a phantom gift that appears once every 100 years, and usually emerges right before a great war. He explains that this is the worst kind of gift, because its mere existence results in chaos in the world. The plan of the god Fortemis would be to cut off the seed of chaos at its origin, while it is still an egg. Then, the man states that, in truth, he would merely be an agent who carries this out. Arguing back, the hero asks whether it could be the other way around. He asks if it is possible for a hero to be born because a conflict occurs, instead of a conflict happening when a hero appears. Hearing this, the general only asks whether the young man has any basis to say that, and he replies that he does not. Solsui says he likes the kid's attitude, but that it is not worth arguing without a theory. With his magic surrounding his fist, the man says it is time to end this, and charges toward the boy. By a hair, the hero dodges the attack. As he tries to hit his opponent, the general says the boy makes him feel nothing. Solsway rushes in once more and lands a powerful punch on the ground. Looking to the side, the man finds the protagonist emanating an overwhelming energy. Startled, the hooded man realizes the atmosphere has changed completely. Without ceremony, the boy lands a punch on the mage's face, sending him flying away. Naruto starts throwing punches and kicks at an absurd speed, and finishes with a devastating blow. Fallen on the ground, the general says this is impossible. As he crawls, he realizes the young man's movements have changed completely. Alto then approaches and places a small amount of magic into his finger. That energy makes the general feel his body growing heavy, because it is gravity magic. As he is crushed by the pressure, the man asks why the kid can master that magic when even he cannot. Suddenly, the hooded man realizes that in fact, the hero had been casting gravity magic on himself this whole time. Understanding this, the man goes mad and says he will never forgive the brat. Quickly, he gathers an incredible amount of mana. The general says that this wand was made with the bones of the Lich King and Orichalcum, and that it is the kingdom's finest technology. With no control at all, the man says this attack will cause enormous damage around the area. The hooded man says he does not care if his status is affected, because he will never forgive the one who mocked him. Seeing the unbelievable size the sphere of energy is taking, the hero decides to run to save himself. Without ceremony, Solsway unleashes the attack, Lamentation of the Setting Sun, and destroys several houses along the way. After such destruction, the man descends to the ground. He is exhausted, because he used a large amount of mana in that attack against a mere peasant. The general had been planning to conserve mana to destroy the Colonel family, since he had heard of a skilled butler who stayed at the mansion. Suddenly, the man sees the protagonist approaching, and asks how he is still alive. However, the hero had barely escaped, and had to use every safety mechanism he had prepared. That way, the boy managed to avoid the full impact that attack would have had. Completely injured, Alto understands he would already be gone for good if his opponent had all his mana available. Cornered, the man tells the young man to back off and throws a rock at the boy's head. Even so, the hero keeps walking, because that pain is nothing compared to Hana's pain. As he approaches the general, Naruto agrees that he is an inferior person. However, he says he will defy fate to protect those he loves. Then, with a simple headbutt, the protagonist manages to knock Solsway out. Seeing the man unconscious in front of him, the kid wastes no time and grabs his dagger. With adrenaline coursing through his body, the hero tells himself he needs to end this. He knows this madman will probably continue to be a threat to Hana's life. Besides, the boy also knows he only won because of the element of surprise, and that next time he will not have the same luck. Even knowing all that, the hero still remains reluctant about what to do. Suddenly, someone calls him master. It is Rion, who arrives at the scene and asks what happened. But as he steps on the ground, the vampire ends up twisting his ankle and gets badly hurt. Upon seeing his friend's arrival, the hero changes his mind and decides to keep the dagger. A short time later, the redhead manages to tie the mage to a rock. Irritated, Ryan says he can't forgive someone who tried to take another person's life for such an absurd reason. Naruto agrees, but remarks that he couldn't deliver the finishing blow. The redhead consoles him, saying that finishing a human is different from finishing a monster. He also says that Galmi-jin caused enormous damage, and that the government will take the necessary measures. At that, the vampire says it's truly impressive that the master defeated one of the 12 generals. However, the boy talks about the context of the fight, and comments that the situation could have been completely different. One of the factors that helped him win the fight was the increase in his existence power. Increasing his power by just 1 star ended up greatly improving his status. The difference was so great that the hero imagines he wouldn't have survived if he were still 1 star. Worried, the redhead asks if his master is okay, and he replies that he was just thinking. Changing the subject, he asks whether Magica didn't come along, and upon hearing that, the vampire is surprised. His friend explains that the girl left the inn before him. Confused, Naruto asks where she might have gone, but the vampire says she'll be fine. Suddenly, the protagonist's spider sense goes off. Quickly, he pushes the redhead. A lightning bolt passes between the two, and explodes on the ground. The one who launched the attack was Citri. With the memory of a goldfish, Rion asks who the woman is. In response, she says she helped them sell the dragon materials. The woman introduces herself as Citri Justice, one of Euphonia's 12 generals and the judge of the Justice Committee. At that, the judge calls the redhead an idiot, and the man, in turn, badmouths her hair. The two end up arguing like children. Changing the subject, the woman explains that she didn't come to argue with a foolish commoner. Getting straight to the point, she reveals that she came because of the protagonist. Without mincing words, the woman says she recognizes the young man as evil. Indignant, the redhead says it was Gemi-jin who destroyed the street, and that his master did absolutely nothing wrong. Citri agrees and says the hooded man will have his position revoked and will receive an appropriate punishment. However, she states that that doesn't matter, because her mission is to eliminate those her god declares as evil. The woman then announces that she judges the boy a criminal in the name of the Judicial Justice Committee. Without wasting time, she lunges at the kid with her sword. But the vampire steps in to block the attack and asks whether a judge's job involves killing innocent people. As she pulls back, the woman sneers, saying she thought the man was just a muscle-headed idiot, but that he has some skill. At that moment, Aruto tries to warn his friend about the general's weapon. However, the redhead is an airhead and ends up ignoring it. Aruto charges in and ends up landing a blow on the opponent's hair. Seeing that, the hero grows worried. With her eyes closed, the judge lands a direct strike on the man's arm, but the vampire feels nothing, because he has already fully mastered pain resistance. However, his arm ends up badly injured, and he drops to his knees. The man is confused, because up to then he had mastered pain resistance. At that, the hero explains that her sword is reliable justice. He also says that his friend's abilities are superior to the opponent's. However, the reason he can't win is that the judge's artifact activates a curse if its owner is hit by someone stronger. Because of that, the woman deliberately let herself be attacked. As a consequence, pain resistance was nullified. Reinrun asks whether a single blow wouldn't be enough to incapacitate him. Aryu argues that the impact was significant even while only cutting a bit of hair, and that taking a stronger hit could result in his end. The stronger someone is, the harder it will be to defeat the judge. In shock, the redhead wonders how he's going to defeat someone like that. Citri comments that the boy seems to know quite a lot about her artifact, even though he has never used it on her. The hero then asks whether the two of them have ever fought at some point in a past life. Hearing that, the woman gets irritated, because she thinks it's some trick to buy time. Suddenly, an explosion erupts in the background. Startled, the protagonist realizes the explosion came from the Colonel family's house. At that, Alto asks his friend to go with him to the family's house and see what's going on. However, a lightning bolt emerges from the site of the explosion. Perplexed, Alto realizes it's a power even stronger than Gamijin's. Right behind the pair, the judge appears and asks whether the young man thinks he'll be able to escape. She explains that this light belongs to the god Fortemis. The woman says the boy must be panicking, since he can't remain standing before a god. With the great sword in hand, Justice declares that she will end things now. As he leaps toward the blade, the hero wonders whether he will really be able to save Hana. However, his mascot appears in front of the sword to protect its master. It ends up crashing down hard onto the roof. Desperate, the boy runs toward his friend and sees him falling apart in his hands. Unable to react, the protagonist begs his mascot not to leave him. At that moment, several memories with his partner surface in his mind and shatter. Indignant, the boy walks up to the judge. Without thinking twice, he grabs his dagger and launches an attack. However, he ends up being teleported somewhere else. At that moment, the boy realizes he is without his weapon. In the background, someone asks whether the young man doesn't know how dangerous this artifact is. Looking around, the protagonist realizes he is in the place he visited when he was killed in his past life. The little ghost asks the boy to sit down, and he does. Getting straight to the point, Aruto asks if he is dead. Surprisingly, the host replies that he isn't, and that his soul is already near its limit, because despite the younger body, the hero's soul remains unchanged from his previous life. He explains that the slime's death brought the boy's soul to the brink of destruction. At that, Alto asks to be taken back, but the ghost asks what the boy intends to do when he returns to the original world. Hearing that, the hero becomes deeply irritated, and all his thoughts of wanting to kill the judge show through. After reading those thoughts, the host simply starts destroying the ground and says he can't let the boy go back, if that's the case. Indignant, the protagonist asks why, and says that woman killed his friend. However, the ghost comes closer and says the young man should remember what his purpose was. At that moment, Aruto remembers Hana. The spirit explains that the two share the same goal, and that he can't just stand by watching the hero's soul fall to pieces. Then the ghost asks again what the boy intends to do. Trying to control his feelings, Alto says he only wants to save Hana. After hearing that, the host comes closer and remarks that the young man only wanted to save someone he cared about, and that because of that he will be sent back. Then the ghost says his soul doesn't have much time before it disappears, and that he will now restart the journey. The hero returns to the real world at the exact moment he was about to finish off his opponent. However, he decides to stop and put away his weapon. On her knees, the woman screams at the boy, who simply ignores her. It is explained that this artifact is effective against strong opponents, but the downside is that it curses its owner if they fight someone weaker. In response, the protagonist tells the judge that he no longer has time to deal with her, which leaves her indignant. The boy asks his friend to go to a safe place and take the slime with him. Hearing that, the redhead asks whether his master plans to go to that place alone. Then the hero replies that he doesn't want to make Rue suffer anymore, and that the two of them should bury him after Hana is saved. Then the vampire says he will protect the slime, but that, in exchange, his master must protect the blonde girl. In addition, he also asks the hero to promise to come back alive, and Aruto does. Sometime later, Ryun tells the judge that she should leave this place as quickly as possible, which confuses her. The man merely comments that she is one of the 12 generals and that this country has come to an end. A few minutes earlier, Magica is running through the city, already knowing that her master is fighting someone. She could sense the magical energy from far away and understands that the opponent was probably Gami Jing. The girl would like to help her friend, but she can't do that because she senses a strange energy coming from the Colonel Mansion. Upon arriving at the place, the princess already assumes that this strange sensation is Fortemis's doing. The divine egg appeared that very day, but the noblewoman didn't think everything would happen so fast. Quickly, Magica approaches the house, but when she looks up, she ends up facing a strong light. Next, a huge explosion erupts from that light at the mansion. This is in fact an attack by the divine shadow. Desperate, the girl runs toward the front door, because Hannah may be in danger. Upon entering the room, she is met with a horrific scene. Several members of the family have already kicked the bucket. The shadows detect the intruder's presence and head toward her. Determined, the princess says she cannot stand still and let the hero's budding power be cut short. One of the shadows tries to attack her, but the girl manages to dodge at the last second. However, one of the enemies lands a direct blow to her chest, but it was a kind of illusion, allowing Magica to escape. The heroine then moves into close quarters combat and takes out a few shadows. Suddenly, she hears a scream and starts running. When she reaches the second floor, the squirrel girl comes face to face with several enemies. With no time to waste, the girl throws several punches at an absurd speed. That way, she manages to make an opening and continue her search. Before long, the heroine reaches the bedroom and sees one of the shadows about to attack Colonel. Acting quickly, the girl grabs her sword and throws it toward the monster to finish it off. Hannah is startled, but realizes the blow was not enough. Then the blonde picks up the sword and finishes the job for good. Desperate, Hannah runs toward her friend and says that everyone has died. Magica comforts her and apologizes for arriving too late. At that moment, another shadow appears. Then the squirrel girl prepares to fight, while warning that she will not let anyone lay a hand on her friend. Some time passes, and the hero is running toward the mansion. Nervous, he wonders whether his fate will remain unchanged even after defeating Gami Jin. However, when he reaches the front of the house, the young man sees his two friends. Seeing that, the hero feels relieved and asks if both of them are okay. Magica then asks them to talk about it later, and warns that an even greater force will arrive soon. She says they have no time. Suddenly, a light appears behind Alto. It is some kind of angel. Nervous, the protagonist thinks that this aura is identical to the demon he faced in Kinotogris, but with an even greater sense of power. Soon he understands that this being must be a demon intentionally created by God. This being is the Saint of Darkness. Faced with this situation, the boy deactivates his hack to conserve more mana. Naruto knows he will not be immobilized thanks to his differential resistance, and that it should be enough. However, the angel quickly closes in with its weapon. By a hair's breadth, the hero manages to dodge a fatal blow. The monster manages to pivot and tries to strike again, but this one is blocked by the boy's dagger. Yet the blow is so strong that it ends up breaking the protagonist's blade. Seeing that, Alto is shocked because that dagger was forged from a dragon's tooth and is extremely durable. The final boss aims for the kid's chest, but Magica appears to save her friend, and in doing so, manages to knock the creature away. The hero thanks her, but the princess tells the master not to let his guard down. The protagonist is fascinated by the strength this angel has, combined with its agility. Thinking of a strategy, the hero tells his friend to attack from the front, while he attacks from behind. Naruto came up with this strategy because Magica can match the angel's speed and distract it. While that happens, the boy can use a long-range spell, like a fire spell. The boy's idea is to synchronize his fire with his companion's movements. That way their opponent will have to avoid the girl's attacks, creating a blind spot. Then, in that blind spot, the hero can strike. He sees that the damage was small, but the effect is still noticeable, so he tells Magica to fall back. With full force, the hero uses his firepower to the maximum. Then he wonders whether the attack was strong enough to finish the opponent. However, the angel manages to get up without any trouble. Then it raises its wings, which glow golden, leaving the boy confused. Without hesitation, it launches several golden feathers toward its target, which end up hitting him. Afraid of the outcome, Naruto resorts to using his hack. However, he is not successful. One of the feathers hits him full force in the chest and throws him into the mansion. Fallen on the floor, the boy opens his eyes as he wonders if he is alive. He is surprised to see that he is fine, because he is certain the feather hit his heart. However, the hero realizes that Amulet protected him as if by a miracle. But he changes his mind, because he understands that everything he has done was to get here, and therefore he cannot give up now. As he gets up, something catches his attention. It is the legendary sword of the Colonel family. The young man approaches it and soon remembers everything Hannah explained about that sword, never having been used. With no alternative, Alto gives in and picks up the sword. However, he ends up feeling as if he were putting his hand on ice. acting as if he were King Arthur. Naruto tries to pull the sword from its place. After a lot of effort, he finally manages to pull it from the stand. With this rare item in hand, the protagonist feels that he is now more prepared. Meanwhile, Magica continues her fight with the angel. She ends up taking a heavy blow and falling to the ground. The boss is about to finish the girl off when the hero appears to block the attack. Alto apologizes for being late and says he will take care of the rest. At that moment, the boy sees that this sword is so powerful that it is withstanding the impact of the angel's attacks. However, he realizes its cutting power is poor and wonders if that is due to its restriction. Quickly, the angel fires a beam from its mouth, like a dragon. That beam is strong enough to slam the boy to the ground. Worried, Hannah shouts from the balcony. Afraid, the hero tells Colonel to stay inside the house. Without wasting time, the angel runs toward the girl. Desperate, the kid tells his friend to run, but the enemy is very fast and manages to get very close to the girl to complete the mission. Seeing that his beloved might be destroyed, the hero ends up finding strength he didn't know he had. With his sword infused with magic, he runs toward the angel and strikes it with everything he has. The boy finally understands that this is the true power of the restriction. Confident, he says that now he can end all of this at once. Surprisingly, a light appears from the angel's armless side. That light is in fact a beam that destroys a large part of the city. In shock, the protagonist realizes that if he had cut a little more, he could have ended up destroying all of Euphonia. That way, he understands that only one choice remains. Quickly, Alto comes down with Hannah in his arms and asks his friend to take care of her. Hearing this request, the Squirrel Princess begins to realize what it means. Alto explains that defeating the angel here means Colonel will be caught up in it as well. At that, his friend suggests going in his place, but the hero argues that only she can protect Hannah. Magica then accepts the request without arguing. The blonde then stands up and asks what her master intends to do. However, all she gets is silence. Worried, the girl asks why he is not saying anything, and asks whether the two of them will be able to meet again soon. Desperate, Colonel begins to beg for an answer. Magica steps in and asks if the girl wants to waste Alto's resolve. Breaking the silence, Alto calls out to Hannah. Smiling, he says he was happy to have met her, and thanks her for everything. After hearing that, the noblewoman begins to cry. The protagonist then asks his friend to take care of Colonel, and at that moment, Magica leaps away with the girl in her arms to another place. After the farewell, the hero tries to focus on his objective. A beam of light comes toward him, but he manages to dodge it. He charges at the angel, while stating that he needs to do everything he is capable of. With the sword in hand, Alto understands that he cannot defeat the angel here. Then, he blocks one of the beam attacks with his sword. The attack is very powerful, and makes it difficult for him to hold out, even with such a strong weapon. But even so, he manages to go all the way and strike the angel with everything he has. His sword ends up hitting the exact area from which the light attacks were coming. Its arm tries to do something, but it is as if the outlet is clogged. Both are flying through the sky. The hero calls this powerful spell reversal. At this moment, he uses the hack to go farther and farther away with his opponent. Despite the difficulties, Alto says he will not give up until he destroys the path to Colonel. In his mind, good moments with his group appear, making the boy think he should have been kinder to Rion. Another regret is that he was unable to save Rue. In addition, the young man thinks he would never have come this far if it weren't for Magica, who helped him many times. The protagonist also thinks about Hana, and that he was very happy to have met her. He says it was because of her that he managed to become someone strong, and that this happened because his life gained meaning with her. At this moment, Alto admits that he loves Hana. Then, everything explodes like a final act of love. It is explained that, on that day, a powerful explosion occurred in Euphonia's northern district, and that everything happened within a radius of 1.5 miles. They say that no one would have survived if this explosion had occurred above the royal capital. Some information was also announced by the Vatican. Ryan looks at the poster of Naruto and Magica. Both were deemed beings who disturbed the world order. Thus, they were designated as exclusion factors by the Vatican. They were immediately detained and transported to the Serene Empire, with their destination kept secret.